My name is Silas Merrin, and at my sister's wedding, her father-in-law looked straight through me like I was part of the wallpaper. He didn't nod, didn't smile, just brushed past me with that particular brand of entitlement that only men like Harrison Whitlock carry. Sharp suit, sharper ego, and a gaze that scans for status like radar. He didn't know who I was. Not really, which was fine by me. See, Harrison has spent the last year trying to buy out a tech company he thinks is just a rising name in back-end automation. His advisors have pored over contracts. His lawyers have lowballed. He's written emails filled with sugar-laced condescension, assuming the founders on the other end are desperate enough to sell. But the man he dismissed at the champagne table, the one in the plain navy suit, sipping quietly, just another background guest, that man built the company with blood in his coffee and ash in his lungs. That man raised his sister when their father died and their mother disappeared. That man skipped every shortcut, earned every ounce of peace he now has. And tonight, as Harrison lifted his glass and turned his back on me, I didn't flinch. I just waited. Waited for the moment the mic would be passed, my name announced, and silence would stretch long across the ballroom floor. When I stood up, he turned. And when I introduced myself, his face turned pale, and all I did was smile. The call came at 3:07 a.m. I remember, because I had just closed my laptop and was crawling into bed after writing a paper I barely cared about. My eyes were burning. My spine ached from sitting on a borrowed futon. I was 22, 3 weeks away from graduating, and hanging on by caffeine and instinct. The phone lit up with my advisor's name. I thought maybe I'd missed a deadline. Instead, I heard silence, then her voice, low and careful. "Silas, there's been an accident. It's your father." That sentence took the air out of the room, not because it didn't make sense, but because I knew. I just knew. I remember pulling on jeans over my pajamas, shoving what little I had into a duffel, and driving 5 hours through the early morning fog to the town I'd been trying to outgrow. By the time I arrived, the house felt smaller, empty. My 17-year-old sister, Lenora, met me at the door. Her hoodie sleeves were stretched over her fists, and her face looked like she hadn't slept in days. Neither of us cried, not really, not then. The funeral was blurred into one long stream of handshakes and casserole dishes. But the days after were mercilessly sharp. Dad had always been self-employed. He repaired things, old clocks, vintage radios, sometimes boats. He was brilliant with his hands and hopeful in a way that didn't always pay the bills. I thought we were okay. Turns out he'd been drowning quietly. The debt hit fast. The mortgage was behind. The workshop had liens. There were unpaid taxes, credit cards I didn't know existed. I remember holding a letter from the county and realizing we were going to lose the house. By then, Mom was long gone, ran off when I was 14, remarried by the time I turned 16. We hadn't heard from her since Lenora was in braces. There would be no safety net, just me. One night, after our last relative drove off and the fridge hummed louder than the silence in the living room, I looked at Lenora curled up on the floor under Dad's old flannel and knew the truth in my bones. No one else was coming. I was it. I dropped out of graduation. I deferred a job interview. I went back to campus for exactly 1 day, long enough to pack a suitcase and withdraw from the ceremony. Then I started hustling. My scholarship had covered tuition, but not housing, not food. I begged my way into a coffee shop shift, then picked up a courier job on campus. I worked mornings steaming milk, afternoons hauling documents across town, and nights wiping down machines or studying on the floor of the library until they kicked me out. I slept maybe 4 hours a night, usually in a shared apartment, with someone else's cat climbing across my face. Lenora stayed behind, finishing high school in a daze. I sent money home weekly, $50 here, $100 there. I skipped every meal I could get away with, canceled every plan with friends, watched my phone light up with messages from a girl I loved but couldn't afford to love anymore. She needed more than a ghost with a data plan. I remember the night I let her go. She cried. I didn't. I couldn't. I didn't have the capacity. By the time I walked across the fake diploma stage, Lenora had graduated with honors. I barely made it through the ceremony. There was no party, no family waiting outside. Just her, standing beside a dusty sedan with an old coffee cup wedged in the cup holder, holding a plastic grocery bag with cupcakes she'd made herself. We drove back to a small apartment I'd found on the edge of town. It was technically a one-bedroom, but calling it that was generous. Lenora got the bedroom. I got a pull-out couch that creaked like a dying animal every time I shifted, but it was ours. And that first night, eating store-brand mac and cheese while listening to the neighbor's dog bark like a metronome, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Determined. I started applying for jobs that didn't require connections. I landed one at a logistics firm, back-end processing, order flow management, accounts payable. It wasn't glamorous, but it had health insurance, and that was enough. I clocked in every morning at 7:45 a.m. sharp, answered emails from people who thought I was replaceable, and printed reports I barely understood at first. But I learned. Quickly. I also learned how to fake confidence in khakis, how to stretch a single loaf of bread over 3 days, and how to fall asleep sitting upright when the couch gave out. Every night I cooked, even if it was eggs and toast. I taught Lenora how to budget, how to clean the bathroom with vinegar and a prayer, how to breathe through a panic attack without crying in public. And in the background of it all, I studied. Online courses, free trials, late-night YouTube rabbit holes on automation, logistics, optimization theory. I didn't know what I was preparing for, but I refused to let the next blow catch me off guard. It was about 6 months in when the message came. Theo Ruiz, a friend from a class I barely remembered. He'd always had a manic energy, started 3 businesses before turning 20. Most had failed, but he learned something each time. Now he had a real idea, he said, something big. A SaaS product for back-end automation, early stage, still duct tape and dreams. He needed someone who understood systems, operations, who could handle implementation and clean up his messes behind the curtain. I hesitated. I had a stable paycheck, insurance, routine. But there's a kind of stillness that feels like suffocation, and I hadn't felt alive in a long time, so I said yes. By day, I wore the khakis and clocked into someone else's dream, but by night, after dinner, after dishes, after tucking Lenora into sleep, I built flowcharts, wrote customer protocols, and stayed up till 2 a.m. fielding test cases and feature bugs with Theo. We worked out of coffee shops, borrowed server space, laughed through caffeine crashes and near breakdowns. Some nights, I passed out with my laptop still glowing on my chest, the cursor blinking like a heartbeat. We called it keel, like the balance point of a ship. It fit. The first 6 months were brutal. 0 revenue, lots of rejections. One co-founder bailed after a week-long argument over feature scope, but Theo and I kept going. Then we landed a pilot. A mid-sized logistics firm tried our system and shaved 40% off their processing time. They referred 2 others. Within 2 weeks, we had meetings booked solid and our inboxes overflowing with demos. Keel had legs, real ones. But I didn't quit my day job. I knew better. Too many things can fall apart too fast, so I saved. I tracked every invoice. I answered every ticket. I played the ghost in the system. Theo was the public face. TEDx talks, podcasts, interviews. He thrived on the spotlight. Me? I preferred the silence, the shadows. Not because I was shy, because I'd learned that real power doesn't need an audience, and some stories are best told not through press releases, but through the quiet steadiness of a sister coming home to a working heater, a stocked fridge, and lights that always turn on. There's a certain kind of silence that only comes at 1:47 a.m., the kind where even the refrigerator hum feels too loud, and your own breath sounds like a clock ticking through the dark. That's when Keel was born, on those nights when exhaustion blurred the edges of the screen, when Theo's voice on the other end of the video call was the only thing tethering me to a future that didn't feel entirely imaginary. We didn't have money, we didn't have a roadmap, but we had urgency, and that was something. Theo coded like a madman. I built systems around his chaos. He'd dream up features, and I'd find ways to make them scalable. We fought often, not out of ego, but from pressure. We were both broke, tired, and stretching $2 decisions into $200 outcomes. The second client came because someone at the first company mentioned us during a Zoom call. The third came after an intern read about us in a startup blog and begged her manager to give us a shot. Slowly, Keel started showing up on internal Slack threads and LinkedIn discussions. Not as a flashy name, but as a whispered recommendation, something real people used that actually worked. We didn't have time to celebrate. There were bugs to fix, feedback loops to close, security checks to run. We couldn't afford a marketing team, so I handled outreach myself, email campaigns between bites of cereal, onboarding calls between my day job's quarterly reviews. Every new client meant another late night, another spreadsheet, another demo. And still, I didn't tell Lenora. She knew I was busy, that I was tired, but she didn't know I was splitting myself in two. She had started at a state university by then, on merit, on scholarship. I paid whatever her grants didn't cover. Rent, books, a used laptop, groceries. I didn't want her to feel guilty, so I told her I was consulting part-time. Which was true, just not for someone else. Theo kept pushing us forward. He believed in press, in momentum, in appearances. I believed in infrastructure. If he was the banner, I was the scaffolding. And honestly, I liked it that way. The turning point came when a major distribution chain, one of the top 5 in the Midwest, signed a 6-month trial. That deal changed everything. We had to register as a real business, hire our first contractor, set up payroll. That night, Theo called me and said, "We're not pretending anymore, Silas. We're in it." I didn't respond right away. I was sitting on the fire escape of our apartment, watching the city lights blink back at me like stars through pollution. I felt it then, the weight of it, not fear, not even pride, just relief. We had built something that worked, and I had built a life where my sister didn't have to count every dollar at checkout. That was all I ever wanted. Still, I didn't leave my job. Not yet. I knew how fast things could collapse. We had momentum, but not stability. We were growing, but growth could eat itself if not managed. So I stayed the ghost, answering corporate emails at 9 a.m., resolving API bugs at 2 a.m., drinking more coffee than water. Eventually, we reached a milestone, recurring revenue high enough for both of us to go full-time. Theo took the leap immediately. He'd been waiting. I waited 3 more months, then quietly handed in my notice. No fanfare, just a firm handshake, a thank you for the opportunity, and a box of desk plants. Keel took over my days, and in that new rhythm, I found something like breathing again. We built an internal culture that was ruthlessly efficient but human. We hired slowly, promoted internally, documented everything. We never took funding. We didn't chase valuations. We chased sustainability. And we didn't forget what it felt like to wake up at 4 a.m. to answer a support ticket alone. I never put my name front and center. The press clippings featured Theo. The podcast quoted Theo. The photos? Always Theo. It wasn't a slight, it was intentional. I didn't need to be the face. I needed to be the foundation. Besides, it gave me a kind of superpower. People assumed things. They saw Theo and forgot there might be someone else in the room. I'd attend meetings quietly, sit in corners, let investors pitch as if I was an intern taking notes. One time, a venture partner offered me water while addressing Theo as Mr. Merrin. I took the glass, never corrected him. Why? Because invisibility, when chosen, is a weapon. People reveal themselves when they think you're irrelevant, and I've always believed the most honest thing someone can do is underestimate you. Years passed. Keel expanded, responsibly, carefully. We had clients in 5 countries. We onboarded nonprofits at reduced rates. We reinvested profits into our platform instead of chasing vanity features. I bought a modest condo with real sunlight and functioning heat. Got Lenora her own place near campus. Nothing flashy, just safe. For the first time in years, I didn't flinch every time the phone rang. Then came the night she called me, voice breathless with excitement. "Silas," she said, "I have something to tell you." My stomach tightened. There was a pause. Then she said it quickly, like ripping off a bandage. I'm getting married. I sat on the edge of my bed, blinking at the wall. To who? She laughed nervously. His name's Nathan Whitlock. He's an engineer. Smart, quiet. I wanted to tell you sooner, but I didn't know how. I had met a Nathan once, vaguely. I hadn't paid much attention. He wants to meet you, she added. That part made me sit up straighter. Anyone who wanted to marry Lenora damn well better want to meet me. I wasn't just her brother. I was the one who stayed. The one who paid every bill, signed every emergency form, read through every college application essay at midnight. He was stepping into her life, but I had built it. So we arranged dinner, just a quiet Friday evening. I offered to cook. He showed up on time, flowers in one hand, a bottle of wine in the other, and a smile that tried a little too hard. I watched him closely. He was well-spoken, polite, steady, the kind of person you'd overlook in a crowd, which made me like him more. But then he said his last name. Whitlock! Something cold slid into my stomach. I repeated it out loud, slow. Any relation to Harrison Whitlock? Nathan hesitated, just for a breath. He's my father. I smiled faintly. Of course he is, because I knew that name. Everyone in our industry did. Harrison Whitlock ran one of the most aggressive legacy logistics firms on the East Coast. He was old-school money in modern clothes, loved acquisitions, hated compromise. He'd spent the better part of the last year circling Kiel, sending over casual interest notes, dangling sweetheart buyout offers that smelled more like entrapment than partnership. He didn't know who he was talking to. Theo had always been the public face. I was just CC'd on the paperwork, and now, his son was eating my roast chicken. I kept my voice level, changed the subject, asked Nathan about work, about family traditions, about what he loved about Lenora. He answered every question honestly, no ego, no spin. Later that night, Lenora cornered me in the kitchen. You went quiet, she said. I nodded. I was surprised. By him. No, I said softly. By you. You're glowing. She smiled, wide and genuine. He's not his father, Silas. He listens. He doesn't make me feel small. I looked at her and believed her, and in that moment, I made a decision. If she chose him, then I'd give him the benefit of the doubt, even if I already knew the storm waiting behind his last name. There are names that follow you. Some, like your own, carry weight because you've earned it. Others hang heavy simply because someone else said them first, louder, with more money behind the syllables. Whitlock was one of those names. In the weeks after dinner, I kept my distance. Not from Lenora, never from her, but from everything related to the wedding planning. I offered help. She declined gently. Said Nathan's family was handling most of it. Said she just wanted me to show up, stand beside her, maybe give a toast if I felt like it. I nodded, smiled, told her I'd be there. But in the quiet corners of my mind, I stayed alert. Because I knew Harrison Whitlock. Not personally, but I knew the kind of man he was. I'd seen it in the offers his office sent. Carefully worded messages laced with flattery, always a little too polished, always missing the point. His firm didn't want Kiel for what we built. They wanted our architecture, our contracts, our back-end reach. They wanted the shell without the soul. Every conversation ended the same. Think about it, you might find we're offering more than just a buyout. We're offering legacy. I don't need legacy, I'd muttered to myself more than once. I need integrity. Still, I kept quiet. For Lenora's sake, for Nathan's. Because I wasn't going to turn her engagement into a battleground over business. That didn't mean I stopped paying attention. The meet the family dinner happened 2 months later. An upscale country club Nathan's parents had rented out for the evening. White linen, glass chandeliers, waitstaff moving like ghosts in tailored black. I arrived 10 minutes early, habit from years of treating time as currency, and found my name on a place card at the far end of the head table. Second tier, expected. The room filled quickly. Nathan's cousins, aunts, a few corporate colleagues of Harrison's. I recognized 1 or 2 faces from tech conferences. None looked twice at me, And then he walked in, Harrison Whitlock. He moved like someone who believed the floor was lucky to be stepped on. He wore a gray three-piece suit that probably cost more than my monthly rent, and smiled like a man shaking hands with people he already forgot. Our eyes met for half a second. He looked me over, shoes, posture, haircut, and dismissed me in less time than it took to blink. When Nathan introduced us formally, Harrison extended a limp hand. "Oh," he said with that effortless condescension. "You're her brother. I assumed her father would be here." I stared at him. "He passed away," I said flatly. "A long time ago." He gave a nod so slight it barely counted, then turned away. No apology, no acknowledgement, just a man making mental notes about who mattered. The evening went on. During dinner, someone asked me what I did for a living. Before I could answer, Harrison jumped in, unprompted. "He's in logistics," he said, waving a hand as if filing me into a folder labeled unimportant, or some kind of back-end support, right? I looked at him, smiled faintly. "Something like that," I said. The table moved on. I let it. That night, I told Theo everything. He laughed, nearly choked on his coffee. "The irony," he said. "The man's been trying to buy us out for 10 months. Still doesn't know it's me behind the curtain." Theo shook his head. "You sure you're okay with that?" "I'm fine," I said. "Let him keep underestimating me." And I meant it. I really did. Because sometimes the best leverage is invisibility. The wedding day arrived in a blur of weather forecasts and floral delays. Lenora looked radiant, not just in the dress, but in the way only people who've survived can look when they're finally standing in the light. She took my arm at the top of the aisle. "You ready?" I asked. She smiled. "You've been walking beside me my whole life. This is just one more step." I swallowed the lump in my throat and guided her forward. After the ceremony, I tried to blend in. I'd played my part. The aisle, the photos, the toast. I stood back while the new in-laws took center stage, shaking hands and taking credit they hadn't earned. Then it happened again. Harrison passed me by with 2 men in suits, deep in conversation. Didn't pause, didn't glance. I could have been the guy refilling the shrimp platter for all he knew. And again, I felt nothing. No heat, no resentment, just quiet clarity. He still didn't know who I was, but he was about to. Someone, Lenora maybe, or a planner with a kind heart, had added my name to the list of speakers. I didn't ask, didn't argue. When the coordinator tapped my shoulder and whispered, "You're next," I nodded without hesitation. I took the mic as the room settled into that soft lull of dessert and digestion. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't tap the glass for attention. I just began. "Good evening. My name is Silas Merrin, and I'm Lenora's older brother." That caught a few heads. Harrison's didn't turn. Not yet. But I wasn't just her brother growing up. After our father passed, I became her legal guardian. I was 22. She was 17. No mother in the picture. No backup plan. Just us. Forks paused midair. Conversation stopped. I worked days, nights, weekends, sometimes 3 jobs at once. There wasn't time for grief. There was rent, tuition, groceries, deadlines, and through all that, she never gave up. I looked at Lenora. Her eyes were shining. She got into college on merit, built a life out of ashes. And I worked. I built too. Something small at first. Just a project with a friend. A back-end tool to help companies automate operations. We called it Keel. Now heads turned. That little project grew. You may have heard of it. Some of your companies might use it. We built it from nothing. No capital, no seed round, just insomnia and intent. At that moment, Harrison finally looked up. His face was blank. His posture too still. I let that silence stretch. I wasn't planning to speak tonight, but I realized this moment isn't just a celebration of love. It's a reminder of what love looks like when it shows up, every day, without applause. I turned to the couple. "You found something rare: trust, respect, patience. I see it. I believe in it, and I'm proud to stand here and say, you're ready." I stepped back to a round of applause, but I barely heard it. Because Harrison was already on his feet, weaving through tables, smile stretched thin. "Silas," he said, extending a hand. "That was impressive. I had no idea." I shook his hand, firm, calm. "No reason you would," I said. "You're the founder of Keel?" "Co-founder," I corrected gently. His smile faltered. "Why didn't you say something when we met?" I met his eyes. "Because I wanted you to see me when you thought I was no one." He didn't reply. Didn't need to. I gave him a nod. "Enjoy the evening, Mr. Whitlock." Then I walked past him. Back to my table. Back to the silence I'd built my life inside. The rest of the room clapped politely, still digesting my words, along with their creme brulee. I returned to my table slowly, not because I wanted to prolong anything, but because I could feel the shift in the air. The subtle way people leaned forward, whispering my name like it was a secret they were late to learn. Faces I didn't recognize now turned with recognition, not because of my suit or my title, but because they had finally placed me in a context that mattered to them. Funny how that works. I didn't care. I sat down, lifted my glass, and clinked it softly against Theo's. He didn't say anything. He didn't have to. His grin was a quiet victory. Across the room, Harrison was trying to recover. I watched him as he adjusted his cufflinks and made conversation with a CFO from some Midwest tech firm, nodding at something he clearly wasn't listening to. His posture had changed, just slightly. The man who had breezed into the room like he owned the floor was now glancing over his shoulder, as if trying to calculate the angles he'd missed. And he had missed them all. Still, I wasn't angry. I wasn't even smug. I'd said what I needed to say. I hadn't boasted. I hadn't listed achievements or thrown around valuations. I hadn't revealed everything. I never do. What I'd given him was just enough to make him think. And for a man like Harrison Whitlock, that was far more uncomfortable than outright humiliation. Lenora came up behind me and wrapped her arms around my shoulders. "You made me cry," she said, half laughing. "You cry at dog food commercials," I replied. "Still," she whispered, "that was perfect." She kissed my cheek and disappeared again, her white dress swishing like a curtain in the breeze. I let out a slow breath. The dance floor began to fill. Theo drifted off to speak with a few of our quieter clients who'd somehow made the guest list. I remained in my seat, sipping water now, feeling the adrenaline begin to ease out of my chest. Then I saw Harrison walking toward me, not storming, not stiff, measured. He stopped at my table, one hand resting lightly on the back of the chair across from me. "May I?" I nodded. "Of course." He sat, a pause stretched between us. Not tense, not forced, just long enough to signal he didn't know how to begin. "You built Keel," he said at last. "From the ground up." "With help," I said, "but yes." He folded his hands. His wedding ring glinted in the light. "I've spent nearly a year trying to acquire your company." "I know." His lips parted slightly, then closed again. He wasn't used to that, people knowing more than he expected. "I didn't know who I was emailing," he admitted. "No reason you would." He gave a short nod, as if conceding something to himself. "You've handled our firm professionally," he said. "Your team is quick, reliable. I assumed it was because you were trying to get bought. We respond quickly because we built the system that way, not to impress anyone, just because it's what people deserve." His brow tightened. He wasn't used to that answer either. "And yet," he said carefully, "you've declined every offer." I met his eyes. "Because the offers weren't about partnership, they were about ownership." He leaned back. "To be fair, most people want to be bought. It's easier, cleaner." "Maybe," I said, "but not always better." He looked at me for a long time, then laughed quietly. "You're more stubborn than your co-founder." "Not stubborn," I said, "just clear." Another pause. "I wish I'd known who you were when we met," he added. I didn't respond right away. Then I said, "I don't." His eyes narrowed slightly. "If you'd known, you would have treated me differently, and that would have defeated the point." He absorbed that. Didn't argue. I stood, extending my hand. He shook it, firmer this time. Enjoy the evening, Mr. Whitlock. He opened his mouth to say something, then closed it again. I turned and left him sitting there. The rest of the night passed like a slow exhale. Lenora danced like a woman who'd laid down every weight she'd ever carried. Nathan never left her side. Whatever else I could say about him, and I'd spent months preparing a mental file, he made her feel safe, loved, like she was never an afterthought. That was enough for me. I lingered near the edge of the room, chatting with distant relatives and old friends who'd come out of the woodwork. Some asked about Keel. Some pretended they'd known all along. Most didn't ask anything at all. They just looked at me differently now, like I had quietly crossed some invisible threshold. I didn't chase it. The spotlight, when it came, didn't thrill me. It just confirmed what I already knew. People assign value after the fact. They wait for a headline, a name tag, a public declaration. But worth isn't always loud. Sometimes it's the hand that holds the umbrella in a storm, the one who shows up when no one else does, the one who never asks for credit but never walks away either. That's what I'd been for Lenora. And that was enough. I stepped outside for air near the end of the night. The sky had cleared, stars finally visible over the trees. Theo joined me, hands in his pockets. Think he'll still try to buy us? He asked. Probably. You gonna let him? I smiled. No? Even if the number's good? I glanced up at the sky. I don't do business with people who need to see your resume before they offer you respect. Theo chuckled. Cold. True, I said. We stood there a moment longer. Then I looked over at him. Let's raise our rates on Whitlock Holdings. Theo grinned. You're a menace. I'm a businessman, I said. We both laughed. Then walked back in. Weeks passed. Then months. The wedding faded into memory, but the echoes of that night lingered. Harrison never brought up the acquisition again. Not directly, but his company still licensed Keel, under a standard enterprise contract, same as everyone else. No discounts, no favors. Just lines of code and lines of respect, enforced by silence and signed renewal forms. He never tried to speak to me again personally, and I was fine with that. Nathan, on the other hand, proved to be as steady as Lenora promised. He never brought up his father, never once tried to broker peace or ask me to bend. He knew his lane, and he walked it with quiet honor. Lenora flourished. She left her university job to start a nonprofit after-school program, one I now help fund behind the scenes. She gardens on weekends, volunteers, smiles more than I've ever seen her smile. Her life is full, her peace is real. That's my ROI. I don't wear a watch that costs more than a mortgage. I don't have a blue checkmark next to my name, but I have that, and it's enough. Sometimes I still think about that moment, standing at the mic, Harrison's face tilting up toward me, confusion shifting to realization, then to quiet discomfort. Not because I wanted to hurt him, but because I wanted him to see. You can only dismiss people for so long before someone makes you look again. 2 weeks after the wedding, I got a message from Nathan. Short, simple. Dad wants to speak with you, just you. No pressure, only if you're open to it. I stared at the text, not because I didn't expect it, but because I did. Men like Harrison Whitlock don't like being surprised in public, and they hate not being in control. A private follow-up was inevitable. Still, I hesitated. What could he possibly say that hadn't already been said by silence? But I also knew that when someone who never apologizes asks to meet, not in a boardroom, not in front of witnesses, but just one-on-one, it's not posturing, it's exposure. So I said yes. We met at a small cafe I liked, neutral territory, not the kind of place he'd choose. The walls were warm brick, the staff knew my name, and the menu didn't need footnotes. He was already there when I arrived. Alone. No suit jacket this time, just a pressed shirt, sleeves rolled, no power move. Just a man sitting with his hands folded, a glass of water untouched. We shook hands, sat, ordered nothing beyond coffee. He got to it faster than I expected. I owe you an apology, he said. No build-up, no soft entry. I raised an eyebrow, but didn't speak. I dismissed you the first time we met, he continued. I didn't ask who you were. I didn't care. That's on me. I waited. Not because I needed more, but because I wanted to see if he had it in him to go deeper. And the truth is, he added, I've spent a lifetime reading people by their posture, their handshake, the first sentence they say. I thought it was intuition. Maybe it was just arrogance. That earned the first flicker of something in me. Not sympathy, not forgiveness, but recognition. You saw me as a shadow in your son's wedding, I said. Turns out, you were standing in mine. He blinked, then gave a short, quiet laugh. Fair. We sat in silence for a beat, coffee between us like a pause button. Then he said, I don't want anything from you. No deals, no contracts. I'm not here for Keel. I nodded slowly. Then what do you want? He looked at his hands. They were still, but not stiff. I wanted to say, I see it now. What you did for her, what you built, and maybe what I didn't build with my own son. That landed heavier than I expected. He wasn't just talking about me. He was talking about all the years Nathan must have felt unseen, unheard. Just a name carrying weight he hadn't asked for. I came here to say thank you, he said. That surprised me more than anything. And to say I respect what you've done, not because of the company, but because of the kind of man it took to build it quietly. I let the words settle between us like dust in sunlight. I'm not looking for respect, I said. Just peace. Then I hope this helps. It did. Not completely, but enough. We shook hands again. No performance this time. Just two men, understanding something unspoken. And as I walked out into the late afternoon light, I realized the win wasn't the speech. It wasn't the silence that followed. It was this. The man who once looked through me, now looked at me. And that made all the difference. A month later, I attended a small dinner Lenora hosted in their new home. Just 10 people. Close friends, no formal seating chart, no fragile egos to navigate. The kind of evening built for conversation, not impression. She greeted me at the door with a smile that didn't have to be polite. It was real, soft, unhurried, earned. Nathan appeared behind her, apron dusted with flour, sleeves rolled, clearly mid-kitchen mission. He waved, easy, relaxed. No trace of the man who once tried too hard to impress me. He didn't need to. The dining table was long but worn, secondhand solid wood, probably refinished with love. Lenora had set it with mismatched plates, cloth napkins, and candles that flickered like punctuation marks between laughter. No name cards, no power plays, just space. Halfway through the meal, I noticed Harrison sitting quietly at the far end, sipping water, smiling gently at something his wife said. He hadn't spoken much, but he hadn't dominated either. He was watching, not as a strategist, not as a gatekeeper, just a father, witnessing something rare. I caught his eye once. He nodded, once, slow. Then looked back to his plate. No performance. After dessert, Lenora stood up to thank everyone for coming. She held her glass, lifted it halfway, and said, We don't do formal toasts in this house, just gratitude and presence. If you're here, it's because we want you here, not for your name, not your title, just you. Everyone raised their glass, simple, unscripted. She looked at me for a moment longer, then sat. And in that moment, I realized something. The real legacy wasn't Keel, wasn't my speech, wasn't even the reputation I'd spent years managing from the background. It was this table. Her table, built from pain, protected by quiet sacrifice, and now surrounded by people who finally understood what it meant to earn a seat. I never needed to be the loudest person in the room. People like Harrison spend their lives chasing recognition, titles, deals, applause. I spent mine building things that last, quietly, without needing to be seen. That's the difference. When I stood up at that wedding and said my name, it wasn't revenge. It wasn't spectacle. It was truth. And truth, when spoken at the right moment, doesn't need volume. After the wedding, after the lunch, after the nod across Lenora's table, I realized something I hadn't been able to name before. I'd already won. Not because he apologized, not because the room turned, but because I no longer needed any of it. I had built a life that held firm when everything else fell apart. I had raised my sister into a woman who knew her worth. I had said no when it would have been easier to say yes. That's victory. The kind that doesn't tweet well. The kind that never trends, but stays. I didn't burn bridges. I didn't give speeches on justice. I just walked out of the fire carrying peace. That's enough. More than enough.